Call the meeting to order of the Higher Education and Career Readiness Policy and Finance Committee. Thank you for being here. First order of business, minutes from March the 15th. Do I have a motion to approve?
I move the minutes.
Representative Daniels? Any questions, additions, corrections? All those in favor of the March 15th minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I guess we passed that. Today, we're going to do a walkthrough of the Omnibus bill that we have in front of us. Just for your information, we will waive the 24-hour rule on amendments, and the deadline will be tomorrow morning at 10. All right? Any questions about that? And then, I'm sure you're aware we're going to be back tomorrow, room 10 at 5:30 tomorrow afternoon. So add that to your agenda. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can we extend that deadline a little bit later so our staff can have time to do that, the amendments in the morning?
Beyond 10? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure what great, is that, how much time would you suggest?
I don't know. Noon? You think we'll be okay? Okay.
Okay, we'll leave it. All right. Any other questions before we proceed? Oh, one other thing, I guess, we prefer to have testimony tomorrow. However, if someone is here and will not be able to be here tomorrow, if someone's here today and would like to testify, we will allow that, but primarily tomorrow is what we prefer, so. With that, I think we'll proceed, and the staff is going to run through or do a walkthrough on the bill, and Savory is going to begin.
Mr. Chair and members, we'll go through the spreadsheet first that was included in members' packets and I believe on the counter there as audience members enter the room. We'll start with the Office of Higher Education, proceed to Minnesota State, then go to the U of M, and then the Mayo Foundation. The first change item for the Office of Higher Education is a $13 million increase per year to the state grant program, the $26 million increase over the biennium. The next change item is on line 14 of the spreadsheet, which is a change item to expand child care grants. That's $24,000 in the first year and $25,000 in the second year, for a total of $49,000 over the biennium. Line 33 is a $1.5 million increase to the spinal cord, injury and TBI research grants. So the rider in the bill would be $2 million per year for that particular program. Line 37 represents line 36 and 37 represent a change, an increase of $100,000 each year to the summer academic enrichment program. So a $200,000 change over the biennium. Flipping to the next page and proceeding all the way down to line 60 are the student loan debt counseling program. That's a $200,000 change item each year, so a $400,000 increase over the biennium. Line 61 is the legal education debt relief grant funding program, $50,000 in each year for that program, $100,000 over the biennium. Line 62 is funding for the Minnesota Life College grants. That's $1 million in each year, $2 million over the biennium. Line 63 is the Students with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities grants, $375,000 in each year, $750 over the biennium. Line 64 is the Ag Educators Loan Forgiveness Program. That's a $250,000 one-time appropriation in fiscal year 18. Line 65 is a one-time appropriation to the Large Animal Veterinary Loan Forgiveness Program. That is $250,000 in the first year. Line 66 is the Pilot and Aircraft Technician Student Loan Forgiveness Program, $50,000 each year and $100,000 over the biennium. Line 67 is the Teacher Candidates of Color Financial Aid Program, $200,000 each year, $400,000 over the biennium. And line 68 is the Greater Minnesota Loan Forgiveness Program at the $150,000 each year, $300,000 over the biennium. Those are the change items for the Office of Higher Education. I'll proceed next to the change items related to Minnesota State. Line 79 of the spreadsheet is funding for campus support for Min State. That's $35,071,000 in the first year and $44,929,000 in the second year, for a total of $80 million over the biennium for campus support. Line 80 is Students with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Program, a $500,000 increase in each year, $1 million over the biennium. Line 81 is our Workforce Development Scholarships, $1.25 million in both years, $2.5 million over the biennium. Line 82 is funding for Health Force Minnesota, which I believe is a program associated with Winona State University. That's $100,000 in the first fiscal year of a one-time appropriation. Line 83 is the Integrated Statewide Record System request. That is a $5 million change item each fiscal year for a total of $10 million over the biennium. And that concludes the Min State portion of the change items. I'll proceed next to the University of Minnesota. The first change item for the University of Minnesota is on line 95. It's a $1 million increase in each year for the MinDrive program, so a $2 million increase over the biennium. Line 96 is establishment of the Students with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Program, a $300,000 increase in each year, a $600,000 increase over the biennium. Line 97 is specifically for the Morris campus to help with payments for scholarships, payment assistance for Native Americans. That is a $750,000 increase over the biennium. Or sorry, $750,000 in each year, a $1.5 million increase over the biennium. Line 98 is the health training restoration change item. That funds that item at $6 million in the first year, $8 million in the second year, a $14 million expenditure over the biennium. Lastly, in the University of Minnesota area, if you flip the page to line 106 on the spreadsheet, you'll see a change item related to investing in applied research for economic development. These are a $2 million change item each year for funding to NRRI. So that would be $4 million over the biennium, and that would be a change to the system special currently in law. And that concludes the change items for the University of Minnesota. If you drop all the way down to line 122, 123, and 124 on the spreadsheet, the Mayo Foundation appropriations from the 2015 Omnibus bill are unchanged, and they are funded at base level, so no change for the Mayo Foundation. Lines 29, 30, 31, and 32 represent the general fund summary, so the total general fund appropriation for those particular agencies within the committee's jurisdiction. And line 135 represents healthcare access fund dollars that go to the University of Minnesota. That's noted in the bill. It's a small item at $4.314 million over the biennium. So in total, from a general fund perspective, this bill, line 133, appropriates $2.8992 billion over the biennium, and that corresponds with the committee's target, which was $149,499,000 over the biennium. So the committee has reached its target in this particular way with all the change items factored in. So, Mr. Chair, I'd yield to Mr. Williams and Mr. Hopkins to proceed with the bill language.
I wonder if there are any questions to this point. Representative Pulaski.
Mr. Chair, I just want to direct some questions to the systems, so when they come tomorrow, they'd be prepared to answer them. Could I do that now?
You can do that, sure.
On line 83, the integrated statewide system record systems, it's funded here at 5 and 5 and 10, and the governor had 12, 5, 12, 5, 25. and there was testimony that 50% of this was coming out of the campuses. I would like the question answered: if they get 5 and 5 and 10, are they going to take the difference out of the campuses? So if we don't fund it, will they then drain the campuses of the difference to do it? And I would like the answer tomorrow so they can give me a complete answer on how they plan on doing this at this level and if they're taking it out of campus.
All right, I think they've heard you and are writing that one down.
All right, then
Is there another one?
I have another one.
Okay.
I'd like to know the totality of this budget on the structural deficit that we had heard about before session. We continually hear about. This is inside Minnesota State. And it was an ongoing critical structural deficit, starting in the tens of millions and working up, how this budget affects the structural deficit that Minnesota State is projecting in the future. And I'd like a number attached to that if possible.
All right,
That's all.
very good. I would also just like to say, we recognize how small the print is, so it is hard to read those numbers, but you did well, you found them. So, yeah.
Mr. Chair, it takes a lot of practice.
Yeah, good. Okay, then we can proceed. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start with Article 1 in Section 2, this appropriations to the Minnesota Office of Higher Education. I'm only going to discuss items that have changed since the last biennium, so I'm not going to go through each rider individually unless there are specific questions from members about them. So starting on the bottom of page 1 of the bill, subdivision 2 is the state grant program. There's an increase of $26 million over the biennium that Mr. Savory discussed earlier. Turning to page 2, subdivision 3, the child care grant program. There's an increase of $49,000 per year for the child care grant program in that subdivision. The subdivisions that follow all the way until subdivision 21 are funded at base level, so those riders are the same as they were in the previous omnibus bill, and the funding levels are also the same. So turning to page 21 is page 5 of the bill. Subdivision 21 is the large animal veterinarian loan forgiveness program. The bill provides one-time funding of $250,000 for that program. Similar language appeared in House File 1189 from Representative Daniels. Subdivision 22 is the Spinal Cord and Traumatic Brain Injury Research Grant Program. That's funded at $2 million a year. That's an increase of $500,000, $1,500,000 per year over base. And similar language appeared in House File 1206 from Representative Albright. The next rider is the Summer Academic Enrichment Program. That's at the bottom of page 5 in subdivision 23. That is funded at $200,000 a year. That's a $100,000 increase, and similar language appeared in House File 1575 from Representative Omar. The next change item is in subdivision 27 on page 7. That's the student loan debt counseling program. Pilot funding was provided to that program previously, but this bill makes a permanent appropriation of $200,000 a year and also creates statutory language, which I'll discuss later. That is funded at $200,000 per year, and that language originated in House File 794 from Representative Haley. The next change item is in subdivision 30. That's the grant program for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. That program is a new program. It's funded at $375,000 per year. And the language originated in House File 2401 from Representative Jessup. The next change item is in subdivision 31, which is at the bottom of page 7 and spilling onto page 8. That's the Agricultural Educators Loan Forgiveness Program. That program is funded with $250,000 of one-time money. It's a new program, and it originated in House File 2226 from Representative Poppy. Subdivision 32 is the Loan Repayment Assistance Program. That program provides a grant to the Loan Repayment Assistance Program of Minnesota. It's a new program, and it originated in House File 2080 from Representative Nornis. The next is Subdivision 33. That's the grant to Minnesota Life College that Mr. Savory mentioned earlier. That's a $1 million per year appropriation. It's new, and that language originated in House File 2398 from Representative Zerwas. Subdivision 34 is new funding for the Aviation Degree Loan Forgiveness Program. That's a new program. And that language originated in House File 29 from Chair Nornis. Subdivision 35 is the Greater Minnesota Loan Forgiveness Program. That's funded at $150,000 in both years of the biennium. That's a new program, and it originated in House File 319 from Representative Lean. Subdivision 36 is appropriations for the Teacher Candidates of Color Scholarship Program. It's funded at $200,000 in both years. That language originated in House File 1409 from Chair Nornis, and it's also a new program. Additionally, the agency administration appropriation on line 8.28, there's actually a drafting error in that. So the appropriation in the first year of the biennium should be $2.564 million, as it is in the second year of the biennium. So that'll, I presume, be cleaned up through an author's amendment tomorrow. Additionally, there was an appropriation for the Student Employer Connection Information System. That's a web-based job and intern-seeking software program. The 2016 Omnibus Supplemental Spending Bill set the base for that program at $405,000, and the rider is missing in the bill, so I believe that will also be added through an author's amendment tomorrow. And that concludes the appropriations to the Office of Higher Education. I'll hand it over to Mr. Hopkins to discuss the system's appropriations.
All right, Mr. Hopkins.
Mr. Chair and members, first to go through the appropriation to the Board of Trustees of Minnesota State Colleges and Universities. I will also only go through some of the major changes that are in this bill. The operations and maintenance appropriation at $678 million for 2018, $687 million for fiscal year 2019. Of this appropriation, $35 million in fiscal year 2018 and $44.9 million in fiscal year 2019 is for student tuition relief. I should note that there's a drafting error in this section. This section calls for a tuition freeze at state colleges, but not at state universities. It's my understanding that universities will be added through an author's amendment. So the O&M appropriation to the Board of Trustees includes a few new programs, $500,000 in each year to implement the program for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And of that amount, $150,000 in each year must go to MnState's existing programs at Ridgewater College and Central Lakes College. In addition, from the O&M appropriation, $5 million in each year is to upgrade the integrated statewide record system. Of the O&M appropriation, $1.25 million in each year is for workforce development scholarships, which are required later in the bill. $140,000 in each year is for transfer to the Cook County Higher Education Board. That's an increase from the 2015 Omnibus bill. $175,000 in both years is to continue the Veterans to Agriculture pilot program that was established in the 2015 Omnibus bill. And $100,000 in fiscal year 18 only is to Winona State University for partnership with Health Force Minnesota to increase awareness for career opportunities in senior care. And that language originated in Representative Daniels' House File 802. The performance goals for Minnesota State are also in this bill as they were in the 2015 Omnibus bill with the years updated. The performance goals themselves are substantially the same. Moving on to the University of Minnesota. The operations...
Reference a page for us, in case we're behind.
The University of Minnesota appropriation begins on page 14 of the bill. The operations and maintenance appropriation is $567.9 million in fiscal year 2018 and $569.9 million in fiscal year 2019. I'll just go through some of the new programs that are funded through the operations and maintenance appropriation. $1 million in both years are for the MnDrive program to advance research for fighting cancer, strengthening communities, improving water quality, and advancing data science. $300,000 in both years are for a program for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, which is required elsewhere in the bill. And $750,000 in both years are for the Morris branch of the university to cover the costs of tuition waivers for Native American students. As with the Board of Trustees of Minnesota State, the performance factors for the Board of Regents of the university are contained in this bill as well. They're substantially identical to the performance metrics that were laid out in the 2015 Omnibus bill, but with the years updated. The other major change at page 21 of the DE amendment is to the system special. This is $7.1 million of funding for general research, the Labor Education Service, the Natural Resources Research Institute, or NRRI, the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs, the Bell Museum of Natural History, and the Humphrey exhibit. And of that $7.1 million, $2 million per year is specifically for the NRRI to invest in applied research for economic development. I will hand it back to Mr. Williams to go on to Article 2 of the bill. Oh, no, this is me as well.
For just 1 second. Representative Schultz, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 15, for the University of Minnesota Morris, the $750,000 in each year, is that new spending that we're giving to Morris that we haven't done before?
Mr. Chair, Representative Schultz, yes, that's new spending.
Thank you.
Okay, proceed.
Article 2 of the DE amendment covers policy language pertaining to both Minnesota State and the University of Minnesota. I'll go through it section by section. Section 1, this begins on page 23, deals with collective bargaining. The change language encourages both Minnesota State and the university to seek fiscal balance in their contract negotiations with their collective bargaining units. And this language comes from Representative Albright's House File 2422 with some modifications. Section 2 of Article 2 deals with consultants. It requires Minnesota State and the University of Minnesota to include in their biennial budget proposals to the legislature data on any work that was completed by consultants for which the system paid more than $500,000. That language comes from House File 1721, which is also authored by Representative Albright. Section 3 of Article 2 begins on page 25. It deals with automatic admission. Minnesota State is required, and the University of Minnesota is requested to automatically admit any applicant who is an established Minnesota resident recently graduating in the top 10% of his or her high school graduating class. The language also requires that average scholarship dollars received by the automatically admitted students must not be less than average scholarship dollars received by out-of-state students. This language comes from Representative Barr's House File 1878 as amended. Section 4 of Article 2 is on page 27. This deals with mandatory student activity fees. It prohibits Minnesota State from imposing on students any mandatory fee funding student programs, activities, or groups. The prohibition does not extend to mandatory fees funding instructional, academic, administrative, or health services. The University of Minnesota is requested to adopt policies implementing this section. The language also states that if the university imposes a fee that is prohibited by this section, the net revenue from that prohibited fee may be deducted from the university's base appropriation in the first year of the next biennium. This language comes from Representative Christensen's House File 2198 as amended. Section 5 of Article 2 is on page 27 of the DE amendment. This is the Minnesota State portion of the Program for Students with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. Minnesota State's required to offer the program. The language in this section states that the program has to be at no fewer than 2 college or university campuses. The programs must seek to enroll 15 students per academic year and must award a credential to a student upon completion. Curriculum requirements are also laid out. In general, the program's required to offer a full-time 2-year residential college experience. There's also a reporting requirement attached to this program. And this language comes from Representative Daniels' House File 2153. Section 6 is on page 28 of the DE amendment. This deals with workforce development scholarships. It establishes a scholarship program administered by Minnesota State to incentivize students to enter high-demand occupations. The scholarships are for $2,500 distributed evenly over 2 academic terms. A lifetime award cannot exceed $5,000 per student. The fields that a student must be studying in order to qualify for the scholarship are advanced manufacturing, agriculture, healthcare services, or information technology. This language comes from House File 2374, which was authored by Representative Haley. Finally, Section 7 of Article 2 is on page 30. And this is the University of Minnesota portion of the program for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. This section requests the University of Minnesota to offer the program that's required of MINSCU, consistent with all the requirements of the Minnesota State program. If there are no questions, I'll turn it over to Mr. Williams.
Okay, any questions? I probably should mention, you inquired about Morris. Just further explanation, there is a longstanding treaty that American Indians go there tuition-free. So it's just accounting for those students that aren't paying tuition, so, okay. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to be explaining Article 3, which is policy related to the Office of Higher Education. Section 1 of that bill, or of that article, relates to developmental education. It requires the Commissioner of Higher Education to publish on the Commissioner's website data related to supplemental education course usage by graduates of Minnesota high schools. This language is based on language that appeared in House File 1142 from Representative Christensen in the DE amendment. Section 2 is at the bottom of page 30. That relates to the assigned family responsibility in the state grant program. The bill would reduce the assigned family responsibility for dependent students, independent students with dependents other than a spouse, and independent students without dependents other than a spouse. And for each group, the assigned family responsibility would decrease by 9 percentage points. Section 3 starts at the top of page 31. Section 3 is the policy or language related to the new grant program for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. That language originated in House File 2401 from Representative Jessup, and as it appears here with minor modifications. On pages 4 and 5, or excuse me, on pages 32 and 33 are sections 4 and 5. Those relate to the child care grant program. Essentially, those two sections make two changes to the child care grant program. First, it increases the 8-semester limit for both graduate and undergraduate students to 10 semesters. And second, it increases the maximum grant through the program from $2,800 to $3,000, which has the effect of increasing the award amounts for all grant recipients and slightly increasing the number of students who would potentially receive grants through the program. That language is originated in House File 2257 from Representative Omar. Sections 4, 5, I apologize, Section 6 contains the language related to the Teacher Candidates of Color Scholarship Program. That program establishes a new scholarship program for teacher candidates of color. It originated in House File 1409. That's Chair Nornis's bill. The next section is Section 7 on page 35. That's the policy language related to the student loan debt counseling program. That policy language was originated in House File 794 from Representative Haley. Turning to Section 8 of the bill, there's the policy language for the new Greater Minnesota Loan Forgiveness Program. That language originated in House File 319 from Representative Lean. Turning to page 39 of the bill, Section 9 of this article relates to the Aviation Degree Loan Forgiveness Program, which establishes a new program at the Office of Higher Education for aircraft technicians and pilots. That language originated in House File 2069 from Chair Nornis. Section 10 of the bill is on page 41. That language establishes a new agricultural educator loan forgiveness program. That language was originated in House File 2226 from Representative Poppy. Section 11 of the bill is at the bottom of page 42. That language relates to regionally accredited nonprofit institutions in Minnesota. It exempts those institutions from certain requirements from the Office of Higher Education, specifically requirements related to the approval of degree programs, the curriculum approval, and location approval, and certain fees related to those items. The language also requires a regionally accredited degree-granting nonprofit post-secondary institution to notify the Commissioner of Higher Education within 60 days of closing. Section 12 of the bill relates to private institutions who face an adjudication of fraud or misrepresentation. That section allows the Commissioner of Higher Education, it gives the Commissioner of Higher Education discretion, excuse me, to revoke or deny an application for registration, degree approval, or name approval if the school received an adjudication of fraud or misrepresentation. Under current law, that's mandatory that be revoked or denied. That language originated in House File 1775 from Chair Nornis. Section 13 of the bill appears at the bottom of page 43, spilling onto page 44. That language adds 2 members to the existing 12-member advisory council for the Spinal Cord and Traumatic Brain Injury Research Grant Program. That language originated in House File 1206 from Representative Albright. And finally, at the bottom of page 44, there's a reporting requirement. The Commissioner of Higher Education must report to the legislature on the amount of funding necessary for the state grant program to fully meet the financial aid needs of lower and middle-income Minnesota college students based upon the program's shared responsibility design. That concludes Article 3 of the bill. Article 4 of the bill is the Office of Higher Education's agency policy bill. That was heard in the committee as House File 1222. That was Chair Nornis's bill. I'm not going to go through each section individually unless there are questions from members on it, because there's a lot of sort of technical provisions, but I'm happy to answer them if members are interested. Some higher level things I would pull out. It requires private degree granting institutions registering with the Office of Higher Education to provide the office with financial documentation. It amends an existing law related to the surety bond that a private degree granting institution and a private non-degree granting institution must hold. It also regulates the advertising by private degree granting and non-degree granting schools. It requires that other than opinion-based statements or puffery, advertising claims must be evidence-based and based upon current conditions at the university. And finally, for both, it establishes language related to student complaints. It allows the Office of Higher Education to receive and investigate student complaints at private degree granting universities. And there is parallel language for non-degree granting universities later in the bill. So those are some of the higher level provisions of Article 4. I'm happy to answer other questions. And that brings us to the end.
All right, thank you very much. We are ready for questions, if there are some. I attended a basketball game this afternoon. My voice is worn out because I don't yell much, but I did today. And we lost, so I'm trying to be in a good mood. Representative Whelan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, staff, for the great walkthrough. I have a question regarding what was House File 1409 and on page 34 of the bill, line 34.14, when we are saying self-identify, what if there's a statutory definition of that, how we're determining self-identification for purposes of the bill?
Mr. Williams.
Mr. Chair, Representative Whalen, that language relates to the Teacher Candidates of Color Scholarship Program. It essentially says that it's what the individual identifies to, self-identifies as and provides to the teacher preparation program when they enter that program. So an individual must self-identify as a teacher, an underrepresented racial or ethnic group. And there's a definition of that on lines 34.5 through 34.8 of what would be underrepresented racial or ethnic group for the purposes of the bill. So if an individual identifies to their teacher training program as one of those groups, then they would be eligible for the scholarship.
Whelan, follow up?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the clarification. I do have some concern with the phrase self-identify in that I'm wondering, and I'm not sure if this is the intent of the bill, Mr. Chair, or if we can maybe work on it more as the bill makes its way forward. But if you're self-identifying, I could say I'm 33% Irish, so I self-identify as Irish, and I would like to represent the Irish students in the state of Minnesota. I just want to make sure we're not potentially opening the door to a lot of different questions about how we're seeking to improve the status of teachers of color, which I think is the intent of the bill. Does the question make sense, Mr. Chair?
It makes sense. I'm not sure that, how much further we can clarify it, but we can sure talk about it and see if there's other language that would you feel better about. But I think we know what the intent is, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to potentially work on an amendment maybe to clarify what this might be allowing so that we just really stick to the heart of what it's trying to do.
Other questions? Again, I'll offer, if there's someone in the audience that cannot be here tomorrow but would like to testify today, we have time to do that, so. If you, apparently you're all coming back. So, well, I guess no questions is a good thing, right? So there are disappointments, I'm sure, to be shared around, because not everything is as we'd like it for some people, but I think it's a good bill, and tomorrow we'll really get down and hear some testimony and then do some voting. Is that okay? I don't even need an okay, I guess. We're planning to do it anyway. So I think we're pretty well to the end of our committee time today, just with, again, a couple of reminders that 10 a.m. tomorrow is the deadline for amendments. And then we will meet at 5:30 in room 10 tomorrow afternoon. 5:30. Oh, one other thing. The bill that you have in front of you, if you would put that back in your folder, save paper and time. So unless you've made a mess of yours. So if you do that for us, that would be very helpful. And I believe without any further questions, we are adjourned.